Once again, we're looking at a train simulator add-on themed around the Colorado narrow gauge, but unlike the two recent reviews, this video's subject is not something from the Milepost Simulations range. Instead, the add-on in question was made by Romantic Railroads, a developer about whom I know very little, if anything. This is the Clear Creek Log and Lumber expansion pack. The Clear Creek Log and Lumber expansion pack, try saying that 5 times fast, was released in February 2017, and 9 years later, it is still available on Steam for 24 New Zealand dollars at full price. As the title implies, this add-on is themed around logging operations, complete with suitable rolling stock, and, curiously enough, a sizable collection of building assets for locomotive fueling facilities as well as logging operations. This is not the only case of a Romantic Railroads product including building assets as well as the locomotives and rolling stock. They've done that sort of thing before with the Deutsche Reichsbahn BR-24, a steam locomotive they released for TS in November 2015. Here's a warning for the rather loud whistle. As for the locomotives included with Log and Lumber, you get the HK Porter saddle tanks in both 040 and 042 variants, along with a Porter-built 260 tender engine known as Argent's Lumber Company No. 3 or the Swamp Rat. The moment I saw the word Argent in her company's name, I realised that the Swamp Rat could also be referred to as the Hold Your Head Up engine. Props to anyone who gets that reference. These days, the little Porter engines give me Railroads Online flashbacks, as do their accompanying wagons, barring the crew car. In saying that, I realised that the aforementioned abandonware didn't yet exist when the Log and Lumber pack was released, and wouldn't exist until 2021. On the topic of logging operations, and as far as I know, we haven't got a Climax, Shea, Heisler, or even Willamette in TS. I've been interested in geared locomotives for a long time, so it would suit me fine if any of the aforementioned designs were brought to TS. It's disappointing to see that no geared locomotives were included with Clear Creek Log and Lumber, since it would have been a good opportunity to bring one to the game. Thinking back to the Swamp Rat, this is quite a curious beast if you ask me, and so obscure that I probably wouldn't have ever found out about her if it wasn't for her inclusion in the Log and Lumber pack. This wood-burning locomotive was built in 1905, originally worked for the Tillman Lumber Company in Sellers, South Carolina, and would later be sold to the Argent Lumber Company. The Argent was established in 1916, and ran a small fleet of wood-burning locomotives on a network running from the mill in Hardyville, South Carolina, to logging areas in the swampy land near the border between SC and Georgia. I've never been there myself, but I dare say that part of the country probably looks completely different from the mountains of Colorado. The company lasted a long time, not being shut down until 1959, but despite their obscurity, 6 locomotives from the Argent have apparently survived into preservation. One survivor is the Swamp Rat No. 3, and she is now a static exhibit at the Southern Forest World Museum in Waycross, Georgia. As interesting as it is to have something as obscure as the Swamp Rat in Train Simulator, her inclusion in a pack centered around the Clear Creek narrow gauge, Golden to Silver Plume and Central City route doesn't make much sense considering the fact that she never ran on this line, let alone anywhere near Colorado, in real life. As for the little 040 and 042 saddle tanks, Their inclusion makes a little bit more sense because they are at least lettered for the Colorado and Southern, although I'm not sure if any porters actually worked for the CNS in real life. Dare say someone more knowledgeable on the aforementioned railroad could correct me if I'm wrong. As mentioned earlier, this pack includes some rolling stock to fit the theme of logging operations. More specifically, you get a skeleton wagon with a few different styles of log loads, a flatbed wagon with a lumber load, a stake wagon that has the same load as the flatbed, and a so-called crew car, which is effectively just a caboose. The rolling stock looks okay as far as I'm concerned, although I'm not a fan of the creepy figures inside the crew car. Why do these guys have solid black eyes? On the surface, I'm of the opinion that this developer did an okay job when it came to modelling the Swamp Rat and Porter saddle tanks, but the modelling is looking somewhat dated by 2026 standards. As for the textures on all three locomotives, they are of a noticeably low quality, especially where the Swamp Rat is concerned. As I have seen on other Romantic Railroads products, such as the previously mentioned BR24, along with their freeware Portuguese meter gauge stock, the locomotives from Clear Creek Log and Lumber have an unusual feature where pressing Z opens the sand dome hatches and water filler cap, but there's no option to open the filler cap and sand dome hatch independently of each other. Meanwhile, you can press V to open all the cab windows at once, then look around the cab and its poor texturing. In a way, the texturing on these models make them look much older than they actually are. To add, the locomotives from the Log and Lumber pack can couple up to the default stock that comes with the Clear Creek narrow gauge route, but the same cannot be said for the freeware Portuguese rolling stock, as the latter uses a completely different style of coupler, one that I don't recall ever seeing in person, or in any other stock in TS for that matter. And if you don't place a driver icon on the porters in the scenario editor, their hatches will stay open the whole time when you're in driver mode. Speaking of driving, I noticed that the Porter 040's cab camera views are set too close to the centre, so you can't really look at the track ahead of you unless you hit Shift 2 to stick your head out the window, only to find that this camera position is set a little too far from the engine. This issue with the head-out camera position also applies to the Swamp Rat, but at least this engine doesn't have the same in-game visibility issue as the little saddle tanks. Before I forget, I wanted to mention that this locomotive's nickname reminded me of a, for want of a better word, funky, Talking Heads song by the name of Swamp. Why that song is called Swamp is anyone's guess. In my opinion, it's the sounds and physics that really spoil the experience of driving the locomotives from Log and Lumber. For one thing, the sound set is generally the same across all three locomotives, and I wouldn't have thought it was realistic for a 260 tender engine to sound the same as tiny saddle tanks. And for another, at least in the case of the Porter saddle tanks, the locomotive's audio sounds like it's coming from at least 1.5 meters ahead of the actual locomotive. Go figure. And speaking of unrealistic things, I noticed that all three locomotives from the Log and Lumber pack appear to have borderline overpowered physics, in the sense that they tend to accelerate too quickly, even with the regulator only open a small amount, and they feel like they don't have much weight either. As for specific audio issues on the Swamp Rat and Porter saddle tanks, there's an excessively loud background noise under the bell, whose audio doesn't get any quieter when you move the camera further away from the locomotive. No blower audio in the external view, only in the cab view. A repetitive ratcheting noise when you move the reverser, as demonstrated on the Swamp Rat. And a weird clicking noise when you move the train brake lever close to or out of the release position. The chuffing sounds, and smoke particle effects for that matter, the Porter engines also leave something to be desired. To add, the locomotives from that freeware Portuguese-themed pack have a sound set that's very similar, if not identical, to the locomotives from Log and Lumber, while both packs have this bizarre feature where you can press U to open the smoke box door. Log and Lumber also comes with 5 career mode scenarios for the Clear Creek narrow gauge route. Well, I say 5, but the first 3 in the list are just tutorials for the included locomotives. Thinking back to the assets, and if you want them to appear in a scenario of your own, you'll need to place them on the route in the scenario editor. A few community-made scenarios for the locomotives from Log and Lumber are available on Steam Workshop, so you can still get a bit more use out of them without having to resort to making your own standard or free-roam scenario. All things considered, I have a low opinion of the Clear Creek Log and Lumber expansion pack. On the surface, this pack presents better value for money than the Clear Creek Old Timer pack because you at least get 3 locomotives, and they were all new to the game. And of course you also get those unique animated components on the locomotives. And then there's also those assets that could be useful for route building. But at the same time, I feel that the Log and Lumber pack is let down tremendously by Romantic Railroads' low quality renditions of the Swamp Rat and Porter saddle tanks. Those things put me off from wanting to recommend this pack to other TS Classic players who like American narrow gauge stuff, to the point where I'd only give the Log and Lumber pack a 4 out of 10. If I could make any suggestions for ways to improve this pack, I would suggest nerfing the overpowered physics, overhauling the sounds, upgrading the textures to a higher standard, and moving the head-out camera view closer to the cab on all 3 locomotives. If you're after a little Porter saddle tank to run in TS, you'd be better off getting the machine rail Porters. Sure, MR's pack may not include fancy logging camp themed assets, or any rolling stock for that matter, but these Porters do at least have better sounds, modelling, textures and physics, the lot. Not to mention an unusual cabless variant. Whether or not this was prototypical, I don't know. But regardless, Machine Rail's pack also includes the 042 variant for good measure. To summarise my thoughts on the Clear Creek Log and Lumber expansion pack from Romantic Railroads, it is an interesting concept, but the execution leaves a lot to be desired, especially where the overall quality of the included locomotives is concerned. The good thing is that you have a decent alternative from Machine Rail.